Hello. Can you
Hello.
hear me?
I can.
Superb. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, so the question was, well, at some point earlier you were talking about learning Virtuoso in a day and you were looking at the build and
hmm
picking it apart. And I'd really like to know how to do that because I've gone on to Hardstuck and I've grabbed a couple of builds, but I don't know what's important in the build and I
hmm
don't know, and I know there's the big wall of text below it as well which tries to explain that, but even with that, it's difficult to pick apart which are the
Oh yeah,
essential components and which aren't.
I completely agree. I actually think this is something that it's quite difficult to express in build guides. It's definitely something that I want to improve, certainly in terms of Hardstuck, of course, and even in hopefully like stream content and YouTube content. So let's talk about that. How do you go about doing that? So the first thing is what. And I think that a really good way to do this is actually by kind of having a bit of a dialogue here. What does your build do? Just describe Virtuoso to me. Like, what does your build do? What do you think it does?
Oh, sorry, I was muted
Oh,
there.
okay. Yeah. Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah, so I do exactly what the game taught me to do, which is press buttons and watch things die. I have no idea what kind of damage I do. I have no idea what kind of boons I apply.
Okay.
I'm really starting from scratch here.
Yeah, absolutely fine. So your build does power damage, right? It does strike damage. So you see big numbers pop up. It doesn't do condition damage. It's a strike damage build. And specifically, you're playing the Power Virtuoso build, correct? Right?
Chronomancer at the moment. I haven't touched Virtuoso.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay, yeah. So Virtuoso, let's talk about the power build for a start. It doesn't actually matter, really, because this kind of approach will work for everything. But the key with understanding like how to pick a build apart is first identifying what that build does. There are three broad categories in Guild Wars 2. We have our defensive support. That means it heals and applies boons. Offensive support, which means you do damage and apply boons, or other utility, all that kind of good stuff. Then you have damage dealers. They're typically focused on being given boons by other professions, other builds, while doing as much damage as they possibly can. So, and we can just kind of go through what I did with the Power Virtuoso. With Power Virtuoso, what I did was, I opened up the build, and I went through all of the traits, right? And I looked at how they all worked and interacted with each other, and then I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. Then I looked at the abilities, and I just kind of was looking at how much damage they do, pretty much, and figuring out which were the good ones to use from that. That's a bit of an art form. You'll get a little bit of spider sense on that once you play the game a little bit. You'll kind of know, okay, this is a big number, right? This is a small number. That's something that you kind of think about there. But yeah, the big thing is identifying what does your build do? Is it applying boons? Does it do damage? Does it heal? And then going through those abilities, identifying what the abilities do, identifying use cases for those abilities, and thinking about how you might apply them to different encounters, pretty much. For example, on Virtuoso, one of the really key traits is, what is the trait called? It is a very big damage trait. Let me look up what it is called. So, it's called Phantasmal Blades. What does that trait do? Well, that trait says that whenever one of your phantasms turns into a clone, you launch an attack at the target of the phantasm, dealing very heavy damage. And you might go, okay, well, that's pretty standard. That's pretty interesting. But what's really fun is when you think about how that interacts with some of your weapons and some of your other traits. For example, in Domination, in Domination, which you might have equipped right now on your Chronomancer, in fact, you'll notice that there is a trait called Bountiful Blades. And this says, Mirror Blade bounces additional times, and Phantasmal Berserker summons an additional Berserker and deals less damage. Well, okay, what do those things mean together? Well, hang on a minute. In Virtuoso, we've got a trait that says every time our phantasm turns into a clone, we get a big burst of damage. And now in Domination, we've got an ability that says we get an extra phantasm spawn. Oh, hang on, I can see how it's all coming together now. So our greatsword essentially now has this synergy built in with Virtuoso because it summons loads of extra phantasms as well. And you might have this heal skill on your Chronomancer right now, which is the Signet of the Ether. You'll notice that, yeah, you do actually. You'll notice that that skill refreshes the cooldown on all of your phantasm skills. Well, hang on a minute. Now, we can use that skill to reset the cooldown on all of our phantasms on Virtuoso. That includes the Greatsword one, and that means we can unleash an insane amount of damage by not only using our highly damaging Phantasm skills, which are some of the best damage skills on Mesmer, but also we're activating this Phantasmal Blade 4 times by double casting the Berserker. And I know I kind of gave some specific examples there, but you kind of what I mean. Do you understand what I'm getting at there? You'll look at it and go like, oh, well, what does this actually do? How does this work with the build that we have there? And that's the way that you go about kind of dissecting a build. Pretty much you read it. And that probably sounds pretty intense right now. And that's because it is, right? I wish that Guild Wars 2 was... I wish that, everyone could understand everything easily and immediately. But let me tell you, this is not even a secret. I believe this is very well known. Guild Wars 2 is pretty complicated, actually, right? It's a complicated game. There's a lot going on. And part of our journey is going to be getting more adept at figuring some of this stuff out. What I said probably sounds like a lot, and that's because it is, right? Make no mistake. I didn't just pull that out my ass. The reason that I can do something like that is because, I've learned a lot about the game in my time playing the game. And in fact, more than that, here's another bonus secret, by the way. I've played games since I'm 4. And here's something interesting, right? And there's a good YouTube video about this. How do you know that the spacebar makes you jump? Well, it's because you played other games before that, right? And this is a really important thing that gets overlooked a lot. Skills that you pick up from other games translate well. So the fact that a lot of experienced players in Guild Wars 2 can go ahead and do that is because of a slow learning process that kind of builds itself up, right? You layer your knowledge as you learn new things in every game that you end up playing, right? And this is the process towards greatness, as it were. But yeah, so when you pick that build apart, you read the traits, read the abilities, identify what the traits and abilities do, and then you identify synergies and interactions between different traits and between different abilities. And it is complicated, right? It absolutely is. And definitely ask questions about builds like, why do you take this trait, right? And again, I want to... I'll give it a really good example here, actually. I'm sure many of you know Snebzor, right? Snebzor was... is a Guild Wars 2 player who actually runs one of the largest raiding communities in the game right now. But there was a time where Sneb just grenade auto-attacked everything. Nothing else. Seriously, he was known in the NALFG as the 5K NG. Seriously, he actually had like a nickname with people mocking him for his putrid DPS because he did 5K DPS. Or like 10k DPS or something like that. Okay? But why? Why did that happen? Right? It's because obviously, he hadn't learned about the game yet. And how did he learn? He actually, and he's told the story multiple times. He joined streamers, right? And he asked them questions, right? Like he asked them questions. He went in streams and said, hey, why are you using that ability? Hey, why are you using that skill? Hey, why are you using that particular trait? And as a result of that, he improved rapidly to the point where the people who referred to him as the 5K NG noticed that he joined and he was top DPS. And how did he do that? He did that by asking questions and figuring stuff out. Because I think there's a really big misconception. There's a big misconception in Guild Wars 2 that you've got to figure it out all on your own. You don't, right? Because good news, people were here before you, right? We got some real greasy nerds up here in Guild Wars 2, right? We've been here for ages. And that means we can tell you how it works. And even better, we don't just tell you how it works, we can explain how it works as well. We can get into it and go, okay, well, this is the type of thing you want to look out for, right? Oh, yeah, you want to have 100% quickness uptime because quickness is really good. Ah, this is why might is so strong. Oh, this is why fury is so good. Oh, this is why, you know, you always want to capitalize on expertise on your gearing. Oh, yeah, this is why that certain builds and certain abilities work this way and how strong they are and the interactions between them, right? Like, learning from others and having this knowledge transference is super, super important, right? So if you're ever in doubt about something, the best thing you can do is definitely ask, right? Because that's how you learn, right? You learn by kind of having like an example to work from, right? Because once you've learned, say, one set of interactions, you can go, ah, so I know how Power Virtuoso works. Let me see if I can apply my knowledge about how this build works to another build, right? Like, maybe I can figure it out there, right? That's like a way that I can now use this knowledge to apply it elsewhere. But yeah, I don't know if that really answered the question, but I think that, I don't know, maybe that was useful. What you tell me.
That was pretty good, yeah, no, I have to say.
Hell yeah!
I'm further along now than I was when I asked the question.
I'd like to see that. That's good. That's a good start. It absolutely is. Very good. But yeah, you know, it's definitely like the way that I think that you can really get into that is 100% by just straight up getting that build set up, right, in the game, just playing around with it, right? Look at some of the skills, read them, try out some of the abilities, right? Like, use some of the abilities, go to a world boss and press some stuff, right? All that kind of stuff is super interesting. And I'll tell you what, this is, again, maybe a little bit more of an advanced technique, but definitely a very useful one. Many of you may have Arc DPS installed. If you don't, I'd highly recommend it. And the reason for that is, what I can do, and you can do this on other people too. So, for example, let's say that I want to look at my... oh, great, it just broke, didn't it? Okay, someone else's damage output. So, if I go on a Mechanist and I click on their name in Arc DPS, check this out. It brings up this window, and it says how much damage every single one of their abilities did. So, what does this let me do? This gives me a huge amount of insight into how this build works, right? Because now I can determine what are their best abilities. So I'm looking at this Mechanist, and oh, Rifle Burst Grenade is really, really good, which is the auto attack, right? Blunderbuss, another really key skill. It's the second biggest damage contributor that we've got here, right? And you can do this for anyone, right? You know, I can, you know, do we actually have a Power Virtuoso? Let's see if I can click on them. Oh.
Yeah, I'm Power Virtuoso.
Ah, yes, here we go. So what I can go ahead and do... Oh, wait, where are you, actually? Are you in the same area as me? I want to click on you. I want to click on you. Where are you? Ah, you're here. Okay, right. We'll do this specifically with Power Virtuoso when we actually get to the boss here. Okay, here we go. All right, okay. Let's go to the Void Goliath. Power Virtuoso, prepare to unleash your fury. No pressure. We will see what your good skills are. Here we go. All right, get him. Get the Goliath. Power Virtuoso. Initiate. Ah. Lovely. And wouldn't you know it? Check this out. And this is a really funny one. This actually really surprised me when I got into it. Check this out. You know that trait I was talking about? Phantasmal Blade? It is the #1 source of damage for this Virtuoso. And this is why you can get Spider Sense for this stuff, but nothing beats data. And you can do this in open world. If you're in a raid pug, you can click on anyone. You can, a class you don't play, you can look at a Bladesman, you can look at a Soulbeast, you can look at a Spellbreak, you can look at a Herald. Look at that. I don't know if you're on the stream right now, but I can see all these abilities. And I can notice that, oh, Phantasmal Blade, really good. Blade Call, that's dagger number 2. Really, really good. Phantasmal Berserker, Great Sword 4, hell yeah, super, super good. Blade Song Harmony, that's the F1, hell yeah, really good. Right, I can go through all of these things, and I can identify the key abilities that a player might be using, and then you can kind of reverse engineer how some of these builds operate. So I know it sounds a little bit nerdy, okay? But the key to improvement and the key to understanding is data. You cannot get better at the game if you don't actually understand the result of what you're doing, right? Like, how do you know you're doing well? Well, you need to measure it. You need to measure your performance and the performance of certain abilities and skills. And the way you do that is with Arc DPS, pretty much. And by kind of going through all of these abilities and traits by reading them, right? Because here's one thing. So, I want to draw a distinction here, and it's between... what do I want to say? There's a big... Something can be simple, but have lots of... Something complicated, quite often, is made up of yeah, this is a good way. Something simple is very... something... words. I'm doing a great job with this. Sometimes something complicated, like a Guild Wars 2 build, is almost always made of very simple components. And what do I mean by this? Well, what I mean is that... Is it complicated to say that, oh, Phantasmal Blade gives me massive damage whenever I summon a Phantasm? No, I don't think so. I'd say that's a pretty... You know, you can read the trait, that's what it does, right? And you can do that for every single interaction on most builds. There are some builds that can be a bit weird, right? But very few, actually. Most builds, and even those builds, they're not that bad, honestly. There aren't that many, like, unhinged builds in Guild Wars 2, in general. But what I'm trying to get at here is that when you're looking at something complicated, like, oh, man, dude, this build is blowing my brain up. Like, this is, poof. I'm having a tough time here. How do you approach it? You break it down into smaller chunks, because those smaller chunks are going to be way more manageable, because they're going to be building blocks that contribute to a larger whole, right? They'll be relatively simple. It's going to be, oh, this ability does more damage. Oh, when you use this skill, you get 5% more damage for a few seconds. Oh, this skill doesn't have a cast time, so I can use it whenever I want, etc., etc., etc. These are all simple concepts, but they add up to a very complicated, large entity. However, this is where that approach comes in really, really key. Don't try and look at this giant monolithic structure. It's going to melt your brain and you're going to get nowhere. Break it down. Like, look at each individual trait and then contemplate how it might interact with the build. Look at each ability and think about how you might use that particular ability. That type of approach, kind of atomizing it down a little bit, it will make parsing the overall structure and thinking about builds and thinking about the game, and this is true of encounters as well, by the way. Like, a lot of the times, I'm sure many of you have seen raid bosses maybe on streams or on videos. It probably looks pretty intense, right? I'll tell you a secret. A lot of the time, it's actually a lot of people doing one specific thing, right? And they kind of have their job in the raid to do. But obviously, everyone's doing their job at the same time, so it looks super, super complicated, right? But in reality, everyone's not doing that much, right? Like, even on a really hard fight, like Harvest Temple Challenge mode, at the end of the day, like, not everyone's doing everything. You have a few, you know, you have each player and each role is doing their own specific set of tasks, but not all of them at the same time. So when you're learning a build, when you're learning how to improve, or trying to pick something apart and figure out how it works, don't eat it all in one gulp. Like, chew your food, basically. Use a knife and fork. Break it up into little chunks, and then add them up, right? And don't be intimidated by something that appears to be very complicated. It probably is very complicated. However, those complicated things will be comprised of small, manageable, somewhat simple chunks that add up to a more complicated whole. And that applies to basically everything in the game as well. When it comes to PvP, when it comes to world versus world, when it comes to all PvE content, all of that kind of stuff. It's all going to be possible to break it down into little pieces that are hopefully easier to digest. Can we get a guide how to split big stuff into small stuff? Well, I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, I can make a guide for it, but it's literally going to be... You're going to have to do a bit of thinking there, right? The guide is going to be, well, I'm going to look at... I'm going to try to identify the smallest component and then go through them one by one. So in a Guild Wars 2 build, the smallest component is going to be a trait, for example, or a skill. Like, this is an individual entity, right, is what this is. And I'm going to go through all of these entities and then kind of cross-reference them, essentially. Main tip for learning Firebrand: learn what every single one of your abilities do, is going to be the way.